welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on this special interview on NewsX. We are in conversation today with Ambassador Navtej Sarna, former diplomat and author. Although today, of course, we're going to be concentrating on his role as author. Yes, he's a prolific writer of many, many books, which we will get to in just a second. But I want to begin by talking about his latest book, which has got very, very good reviews. In fact, it's still talked about even till this very date. I'm, of course, talking about Crimson Spring, which is a very acclaimed novel on a tragedy that shook the nation and still has its ramifications till this very date, the Jallianwala Bagh. So firstly, Ambassador Navtej Sarna, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me here.
Let me just talk to you about firstly, the response that came in for Crimson Spring. I'll come to the premise and the idea behind the book in just a second. But does the response to the book validate sometimes your journey writing it? How did you react to the critical acclaim? But more, of course, from the public at large of the country who deeply connected with the story even so many years after.
Well, thank you. And thank you for bringing Crimson Spring to the fore. It's more than a year that the book has come out. Mm-hmm. And I must say that, given the long years that go into producing a book, at least for me, fair amount of research, fair amount of writing and rewriting, I think you always get very, very tense and nervous how the readers are going to react to the book, because every writer loves his own book, but you need the readers to love them. So the critical acclaim that Crimson Spring got was very, very heartening. The reviews were, most of the reviews were quite, laudatory about the book and recognized several aspects that the writer had tried to bring in there. It's also, so once the critical acclaim is there, the book, the reviewers have liked it. And then a lot of people, as you said, liked it, normal readers, which ultimately is the final test, because it has a book, a novel particularly, has to appeal at different levels to its readership. I think people liked it because people like a certain historical background, which is not too unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. And then more than that, it's not, I think people also have there's a lot of history being written. There's a lot of popular history being written. But then what those histories do is that they talk of the big stories. They talk of the important people. But a novel, you get a chance to talk of the ordinary person, the ordinary person's story, because everybody gets caught into a historical maelstrom in such events. And then, what happens to the normal person, his concerns, his life. So that is what, a novel let me explore. And that's hopefully, I'm glad to say that seems to have gone down well with readers.
Yes, no doubt. What was the idea behind the book, sir? What inspired you to write it? Of course, it's, it talks about the tragedy. It gives various characters' perspectives. It's through multiple viewpoints, of course, that the story is weaved through, as those who read the book would know. But what was the idea behind you writing this novel?
Well, there was the century of, the centenary of Jallianwala Bagh coming up, and I started reading about it. And then the idea, I really wanted to write something about it, but I didn't quite know how, because there wasn't anything new that I could have found in terms of history. One way would have been to recycle history. But I then, when I was researching it, I realized that there were a lot of other things happening in Punjab at that time. It was not just a discrete event which took place on the 13th of April, 1919. There were a lot of other things. There was the freedom movement picking up. There was Gandhi's Satyagraha, which was picking up. Plus, there were other subterranean trends, happening. There was other revolutionaries just a couple of years before that. They had been very active, and then they had tried to be, the British had tried to quash them completely. There were the individual revolutionaries, the Udham Singhs and his predecessors, people like Kartar Singh Saraba and all that. And plus, there was all the identity politics happening in Punjab. There were the identity revivals, whether it was the Hindus or the Sikhs. That was all coming together. The Khilafat movement was happening. So somehow I wanted to bring a lot of these trends together. Plus what was happening in rural Punjab. What was the feel of that vanished Punjab? What was the feel of that united geography of Punjab? Where people could just take a train and go across the Jhelum right down to Amritsar, which we can't even conceive of today. So I wanted to capture all that somehow in a story or a set of stories put together as a novel.
Right. Now, also, just speaking about the title, Crimson Spring, how was that conceived?
Well, as most titles are conceived, you go back and forth and you think of various things. Of course, when I was working on the book, I had a working title. You always have a working title in mind. And the working title was Where Five Rivers Run, And that, of course, once we realized that, it would be too almost cliched about Punjab. So then it's a conversation with, my editor, David Devidar, and myself at home with my wife, bouncing off various titles. So ultimately, when, push comes to shove, when you get a message from David, hey, listen, tomorrow morning, I need a title. Otherwise, I'm going with ABCD. Then you say, no, I have to come down to brass tacks. So on that particular day, I thought of 5 names, and then, we bounced it around at home, and then we bounced it on David, and he immediately liked it. So it brought together 2 concepts. One, it was spring, Baisakhi. You could call it the Indian spring, so to speak, and crimson because of all the blood that was shed on that day. So somehow it struck. It was short, it was pithy, it was evocative, and it worked.
Yes. This tragedy, of course, shook the entire nation then. It's still bone-chilling even till this very date. People visit Amritsar or talk about it, and not just people connected with the state of Punjab, but I think the entire country feels very, very, passionately about what happened then, emotively about what happened then, and still connects with the victims, and, our hearts go out to them. But many believe that the British never adequately apologized for the tragedy. What is your view on that?
Well, it is a huge tragedy. Let's firstly acknowledge that. Secondly, it's not a Punjab tragedy alone. It happened in Punjab, but its ripples, its resonances, affected the entire freedom struggle of India. Thirdly, it was, not a tragedy which belongs to one community or one religion. There were people, there were Hindus there were Sikhs there were Muslims there in the gathering. So, it runs across society, and its impact was deeply important for national leaders to take notice of, wake up, and realize that there was going to be no accommodation with the British, including Mahatma Gandhi. His entire view of how to engage the freedom struggle or engage with the freedom struggle changed after that. So whether the British, of course, there was a lot of debate at that time. There was a lot of debate whether, what had happened. It was the days of censorship, it was the days of martial law, and it was not the communications that we have today. So, in fact, for several weeks, even the India office, the Secretary of State for India in London, did not know the full extent of the violence that his people had perpetrated here. So there was a lot of camouflage, there was a lot of hiding. And then there was a debate, not just in India, of course, there was a clamor, but in London, there was a debate as to how did this happen. We must have an inquiry. An inquiry was announced. It was a biased inquiry. Mahatma Gandhi announced his own inquiry. And then what they did with General Dyer, Brigadier General Dyer in the House of Commons and House of Lords is, of course, well known. But that again revived the debate back home. So a lot was said even at that time as to, how wrong this was, etc., etc.
Yes.
But it was seen, projected as an aberration in the colonial enterprise. It was, a bad moment for an empire which otherwise was a good empire. So it was minimized in that sense.
Yes.
And thereafter, you have seen, 70 years after independence, you have seen very gradual steps. You see a visit by a former queen. Then you see a visit by prime ministers. You see a laying of the wreath. You see an expression of deep regret, which was the last thing that the then Prime Minister Theresa May said. You don't hear the word sorry. And, I don't hold my breath because, it's very difficult for erstwhile empires to, they try to not to say that everything they did was so totally wrong or express an apology. Sometimes they do. Yes. I mean, it would be a moment of greatness if Britain was simply to say, yes, no ifs and buts. It was a terrible moment. And as inheritors of that empire, we say sorry. It just takes that.
Yes.
But it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened.
Yeah. No, it truly hasn't. Absolutely. But, just coming back now to your journey as an author, which I promised at the start, we'll explore a bit more, because we do know about your diplomatic experience and formidable at that from your assignments, of course, abroad to those back home. But how did this journey as an author start for you, Ambassador Sarna? Was this flair for writing always there in you from your young days, or did you develop this over time?
Well, I don't know about a flair, but there was certainly a desire. And, I belong to a family of writers. Both my parents have been writers, besides doing other jobs. And so I was writing even in university. And I certainly knew that I wanted to continue writing no matter what job I did or what career I followed. Fortunately, the Indian Foreign Service allowed my kind of writing to flourish without a problem. In fact, it enriched it, because I got a great chance to travel the world when it was not so easy to travel the world or live in places, to absorb different cultures, different experiences, meet different kinds of people. And I think my writing enriched my diplomatic life, honestly, because it opened doors for me, which, may not have happened in the normal course. It brought me into touch with constituencies and individuals, writers in different countries, reading communities in different countries, which even enriched my diplomatic exposure. So yes, it's not that I, was a writer of novels from day one. No, I started with the journalistic pieces.
Yes.
I moved on to literary book reviews. I moved on to short stories. So I actually tried to learn the craft.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of variety in your writing. Of course, the columns you spoke about earlier, but from short stories to non-fiction to fiction to also translations, interestingly as well, which you've done as well.
Yeah. Yes, because it's, every book I've tried to make every book different. And to experiment with the genre particularly. Some things just happened organically because, the translations came at a time, one was my father's partition short stories from Punjabi to Hindi. And after I'd finished some book, I said, okay, let me give a year to this and bring them out. They're such powerful stories. And I'm glad I did, because now it's a centenary year. And those stories are coming back. They've been included in the Aleph Book of Great Indian Short Stories. And of course, the other translation was from Farsi to English in verse, which was Guru Gobind Singh's letter to Aurangzeb. Some of the things happened organically, like I wrote a literary column for the Hindu for 7 years, and that became a collection, a book called Second Thoughts. I wrote short stories over several years, and some of them were published as individually. And then ultimately, the publishers decided, yes, okay, we can take a risk with his collection of short stories. Normally, publishers are very chary of taking up a collection of short stories. So yes, each book has been a bit of an adventure, a bit of experimenting with the craft.
Yes.
And then I suppose I was fortunate that from day one, I was not locked into one aspect of the craft that, okay, I am a novelist, I'm not. So, I had to become a novelist.
Yes.
And you become a novelist, you had to learn how to hold a narrative, how to hold a narrative over 3 pages and how to hold a narrative over 300 pages, So each one is different, and it's not easily transferable. For instance, if you do a set of short stories, then suddenly try to write a novel, you go dry after 6 pages, or if you've done too many novels, then you try to go back to the short story. It takes a lot of discipline not to have the breadth of a novel in which you can afford to make mistakes for 2 pages and still come back. In a short story, if you make a mistake over 2 lines, you're finished. The story is dead in the water. So yeah, it's been interesting, and it's been experimental. So far, so good.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a year, as you said, since Crimson Spring release. So I think the wait has begun for your next book already. So we certainly will watch this space for more. But thank you for the time being, Ambassador Sarna, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me with it.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.